and her sister and her friend Barbara. This is her and her sister in about 1913. And again, she ran it for, I think, for some 37 years. She ran a girls' camp out there. But she was such a mentor to the girls. When she was back in Independence, Missouri, during the winters, she studied 5 years in Vienna under some guy named Sigmund Freud. She later was hired to run the Chicago School of Psychoanalysis, all the time running this girls' camp in Michigamme. So she was way ahead of her time. And this album was and here's a little shot of her a little bit older. Her name was Helen Ross. And here's another shot of Helen. But in 1913, there was also a little bit of a scandal when the editor of the Ishpeming Iron Ore called Teddy Roosevelt a drunk, and they had to come here and have a big trial. His name was George Newitt. Well, George Newitt taught the girls fishing at this camp in Michigamme, and he took a liking to the girlfriend named Barbara. Barbara, and they never put her last name in there because of the story. They played on their sexual charms to get this camp built by George Newitt. Now here he is, a widower. Now these girls are in their 20s. Here's George Newitt in 1913. And he ended up financing a lot of their camp. He built them their first buildings. So it's kind of an interesting story. Again, they only said Newitt, an influential man from Ishpeming. Well, I knew who George Newitt was from that story. But all the tents, she studied everything at this other camp, where the tents were made. She actually went to Kansas City and had these tents made special. She asked for a fly to be on it, and the guy who's making the tents goes, "You know what you're talking about." And then she said, "Well, can I pay in credit till after the next year?" And of course, she's using her charms too. So they got all these tents for free. They weren't paid for till after the first year of this camp in 1913. And here's actually one of the first albums. The first year was actually 1914. And they had an album of every year of this camp that I got to copy. And here's some of the girls that went to the camp. Now, the tuition was $250 in 1914. That's $5,700. These are all girls from Illinois, Wisconsin, even Missouri that came to this camp. A lot of them had money. But when you came here, you were here for 8 weeks at a time. The train ran right up to the camp, so it was very handy for the girls to get on the train and take trips out to Lance. They did a lot of day trips. Now, when I went through their album, I found a photo of a black porter on that train. Russ Mignani is doing a book on blacks in the UP. And I said, "Did you ever know there was a black baseball player on the baseball team in Michigamme?" There he is, right there on the right. And he said, "Well, he was a porter on the train that used to stop. The last stop was Michigamme." So when I saw this picture of the black porter standing in the back of the train, Russ got all excited, because who would ever think you'd find a picture of a black porter on the train? But I did. And this is the train that the women would take trips on. There's one of the captains. They had just an amazing supply of musical instruments, all kinds of crafts. They did all kinds of plays. Again, this was called the teepee. They had a theater. They built their own stages. They did their own costumes. They did their own booklets. And they put on Gilbert and Sullivan plays. And all these were photographed, these gals, and all their little things. So this is just some of the shots from the album. But there was so many things to do. Here's some of the basket making crafts. They had a loom out there. They had a camera class, learn photography. But they would weigh themselves, they would keep charts, because Helen's sister was a dietitian, her sister Ella. So this camp had just the finest dietitians. They had a psychologist for a manager. Look at how they kept track of how you swam. You had to fill out all these charts. And again, they taught them life-saving. This is right still in Michigamme. That's Kechuwa Bay. And the girls would learn how to perform life-saving. They had all these different sports and diving. But look at the photography, too. There was not amateurs out there. They were there photographing these women to make a book every year. Here's the little K on their shirts, and they got I think they're holding up a big pike. So fishing was a big part. And one of the first gas motors was the petrol. And that was a boat that was out of Lake Michigamme. And they go on hikes. The guy who ran the boat was also a Native American. There he is. And he'd take them on trips through the woods where they learned how to cook their food. He had the guns and the fry pans. They'd go to different spots in the Michigamme area. They learned how to shoot bow and arrows. Look at this. He caught the arrow in midair. That's a good photographer in the early 1900s. They learned how to fire rifles at this camp. Baseball. So I think I copied 300 photos. You're only going to see about 25. But I mean, it was just such an amazing album of these women. This is before there was girls' camps. There was many men's camps. This is before women can vote. And they taught these women all these sports, how to stand up for themselves. They learned how to canoe. They learned all kinds of things. Even they had sailing lessons. And again, even right up into the 1940s and 50s, they were teaching sailing. And even strategy, racing strategy for sailboats. So this was quite a girls' camp. This was one of the little poems that was on birch bark. I usually read the whole thing, but you can see here, a camp like ours is hard to find. It's not like any other kind. Hop on a train and come with us and dress like boys. It's just a great thing. Camp Kechuwa is a hard camp to find. But they had this one camper, her name was Nancy Robbins, and she came for 5 summers for 8 weeks at a time. Now again, by then the tuition is $7,000 in our terms. It was about $365, and she came up from Chicago. And Nancy Robbins was also named Nancy Davis when she came up to Camp Kechuwa. And in this album, I spotted her right there. Nancy Davis. Do you know who she became? Nancy Reagan went to this camp for 5 summers, and she gave talks about her years at Camp Michigamme and how it changed her life. And some of the women that went to this camp became psychologists, they became presidents of universities, and all because of the little camp out in Michigamme. So this is a story that really wowed me. And they couldn't believe it. They go, what, she's in this album? Yeah, that's her right there. You can see it, Nancy Reagan. So that's my Camp Kechuwa story. And we got one more.